You are sitting at the table with your family. Everyone is talking at the same time. Someone just got a promotion. Another has just bought a car. A cousin announces her engagement and everyone gets up from their chairs, hugs, shouts, tears of joy. And you just sit there, not faking joy, not masking indifference. You simply feel nothing, a sort of vacuum where a reaction should be. And as you watch those people getting emotional, a small and disturbing question begins to form in the back of your mind. What is wrong with me? You have already tried to fix yourself. You have read about depression, anhedonia, personality disorder, dissociation. You have wondered if it is childhood trauma, if it is genetics, if it is some chemical imbalance that makes the world always seem a bit out of focus. You have forced enthusiasm. You have pretended to care about the right things, about the right achievements, about the right milestones that society says should matter. Marriage, career, status, wealth, owning a home. You tried to feel the weight of these things the way others do, and you couldn't, not completely, not truly. And the strangest thing of all is that you are not an empty person. There are things that move you deeply, not the things that are supposed to move you. But there is something, a song that tears a hole in your chest, a line in a book that feels like it was written specifically for you, a moment of silence in the middle of the night where you feel, for fractions of a second, that there is something immense that you can almost reach, and then it passes. And the world returns with its promotions and its cars and its engagements, and you return to the vacuum. What I am going to tell you now is not psychology. It is not self-help. It is a 2,000-year-old text found in a clay jar buried in the Egyptian desert, which described exactly what you feel with a precision that will take your breath away. The text is called the Apocrypha of John, and what it describes as Pleromic Misalignment might be the only explanation you have never received but have always expected. Stay until the end. Because what comes next completely changes how you will view yourself for the rest of your life. There is something that modern science, with all its sophistication, still cannot adequately explain. It calls it anhedonia when you do not feel pleasure in the things that should give pleasure. It calls it depression when the world seems distant and colorless. It calls it a personality disorder when your values seem radically different from the values of the people around you. It medicates, categorizes, classifies. But none of these labels really answers the deepest question, which is not what is wrong with you, but why you experience the world in a way that is so fundamentally different from others. And the answer that medicine gives is always the same. You are the problem. Your brain is the problem. Your chemistry is the problem. You need to be adjusted, calibrated, brought back to the average, to normalcy, to the state where you can care about the same things everyone else cares about, in the exact same way everyone else cares about them. But think about it for a second. Every culture in every era of human history has produced a minority of people who simply could not inhabit the world the same way as the majority. People who felt strange, displaced, as if they had arrived from somewhere else and could not find the instruction manual for this one. In ancient cultures, these people were called seers, shamans, pneumatics, the chosen. In our culture, they are called patients. Something very important changed in the way we interpret this phenomenon. And what was found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in December of 1945 suggests that the ancient interpretation may have been much closer to the truth than the modern one. A peasant named Mohammed Ali al-Saman was digging at the foot of a cliff when he found a clay jar sealed with bitumen. Inside, there were 12 leather-bound codices, 46 texts. Most had never been read by modern eyes. Most had been declared heretical by the Church in the early centuries of Christianity and systematically destroyed. And one of these texts was the Apocrypha of John. Apocryphon means hidden text, secret text, text that was not meant to be seen. And the Apocrypha of John begins with a question that resonates to this day. Why is the world the way it is? Why is there suffering? Why is there alienation? Why do some people seem completely at home in this world and others seem to be always looking through glass at something they cannot reach? The answer that the Apocrypha of John gives is not the answer you learned in Sunday school. It is not the answer the Catechism gave you. It is something much older, much stranger, and for some, much truer. The text begins with a description of the Pleroma. The Greek word means fullness, completeness, totality. The Pleroma is the original reality, the primary condition of all things before the creation of this physical world. In the Pleroma, there is no separation, there is no lack, there is no sense that something is missing. There is only an absolute and complete light that exists in perfect harmony with itself. And within the Pleroma, there are emanations, beings of light that the Gnostics called aeons. The Apocrypha of John describes an intricate hierarchy of aeons that exist as expressions of different aspects of the divine fullness: knowledge, life, grace, truth. These are not abstract concepts. They are living, real entities that inhabit the original dimension of existence. And then something happens, something that changes everything. One of the aeons, named Sophia, which means wisdom, commits what the text calls a transgression. Sophia desires to create something on her own, without the consent of the invisible spirit, without the partnership of her complement. It is an act of autonomous will within the Pleroma, and the result of this act is monstrous. What emerges from this solitary and unauthorized creation is a defective entity. The text describes it with a disturbing crudeness. It had the face of a lion and the tail of a serpent. Its eyes cast fire. And when Sophia saw what she had created, she felt horror, she felt shame, and she hid it. This being is called Yaldabaoth. In Hebrew, a possible translation would be son of chaos. And Yaldabaoth, ignorant of his defective origin, ignorant that he was the product of a mistake, proclaims, "I am a jealous God, and there is no other God besides me." This, to the Gnostics, was the origin of the God of the Old Testament. Not the supreme God, not the invisible spirit of the Pleroma, but a lesser, arrogant being who had enough power to create a physical world, but not enough wisdom to recognize his own limitation. Yaldabaoth creates the material world. He creates the archons, his assistants, his cosmic bureaucrats, beings who administer the system of physical reality. And the Apocrypha of John describes this created world with a specific word. It is a place of forgetfulness, a place where beings forget where they came from. And then comes the detail that will make everything click for you. Sophia, repenting of what she had done, makes a plea to the invisible spirit, and the Pleroma answers. It answers by sending a spark of true light into every human being created by Yaldabaoth. A pneumatic spark, a particle of the Pleroma implanted inside a creature made of matter and illusion. And here is the core of it all. This spark, this ember, does not belong to this world. It came from somewhere else. It has a memory, deep and pre-verbal, of a completely different state of existence. A state without lack, without separation, without the frantic urgency to accumulate and conquer and prove. And when you place a spark of the Pleroma inside a system built by Yaldabaoth and his archons, what you get is exactly this: misalignment. You are not broken, you are misaligned. And there is a fundamental difference between these two things. Before continuing, I need to pause here for a second, because what you are about to hear will, in the next few pages, deepen in a way that will demand something of you that goes beyond just listening. It will require you to recognize something in yourself. And for that, there is a material that was compiled specifically for people who reach this point and feel that yes, this resonates, this is real, this describes something I could never quite put into words. The Pneumatic Code is a guide based on the texts of Nag Hammadi, the Pistis Sophia, the Gospel of Philip, and the Hermetic writings, created specifically for anyone who has already felt this misalignment but never had a map to understand it. It is not a self-help book, it is a map of recognition. The link is in the description of this video and will only be available while this video is online. Write it down now if you need to. And now, we return. The Apocrypha of John divides humanity into three categories, not metaphorically, literally, ontologically, structurally. Three types of human beings who inhabit the same physical world, but operate from completely distinct internal principles. The first type is called the hylic, from the Greek hyle, which means matter. The hylic being is one whose internal nature is completely constituted of matter. There is no pneumatic spark, there is no flash of the pleroma, there is only the instinctive, biological, social structure. The hylic being finds complete satisfaction in material goals because the material is all there is: status, accumulation, reproduction, social dominance. These goals are not superficial to the hylic. They are genuinely satisfying because their internal nature is in perfect alignment with the system in which they dwell. There is no judgment here. The hylic being is not inferior. It is simply made of another material. It inhabits this world as fish inhabit the ocean, without the slightest sense that it should be anywhere else. The second type is the psychic. From the Greek psyche, soul. The psychic being possesses something beyond matter, a deeper inner dimension, a capacity to question, to feel beauty, to aspire to the transcendent. But this dimension is still, to a large extent, oriented toward the goals of the system. The psychic may feel spiritual dissatisfaction, but generally resolves this dissatisfaction within the available structures. They find a religion, they adopt a philosophy, they follow a guru, they use spirituality as an additional layer of social identity. They still want approval, they still fear rejection, they still measure their worth through the mirror of others. The third type is the pneumatic. From the Greek pneuma, spirit. The pneumatic being carries at the center of their structure a spark that literally came from somewhere else. And this spark creates a constant and specific problem. It remembers. It does not remember consciously. It does not have clear images or narrative memories of a pre-existing state, but it has something that functions like an internal compass oriented toward a direction that does not exist on any map of this world. And when Yaldabaoth's system, the system of the archons, the system of consensus reality, tries to point this compass toward its goals, toward its milestones, toward its definitions of success and failure, the compass simply does not respond. And that is the Pleromic Misalignment. It is not apathy. Apathy is the absence of a compass. Pleromic misalignment is having a perfectly functional compass that is oriented toward a magnetic field that this world cannot produce. Think about how this manifests in your life, not in dramatic ways, in small, everyday ways. Your boss announces a new goal and everyone in the room seems energized, and you realize you are looking out the window and thinking about something completely different. Not because you are lazy, not because you do not want to succeed, but because some part of you, the deepest part, simply cannot pretend that this goal carries the weight that everyone around claims it does. You are in a conversation, and someone starts talking about real estate prices, about investments, about the latest professional achievement, and you feel this sort of fog descending upon you. Not hostility, not intellectual disinterest, but an almost physical sensation that you are in this place but belong to another, and you smile and you nod and you ask the right questions, but inside there is a silence that no one can fill, and then someone talks about something that rarely enters normal conversations. The nature of time, the possibility that consciousness exists beyond the brain, the feeling that behind the surface of things there is something we can almost touch, and you wake up. Suddenly you are completely present. Suddenly the silence inside you fills with something that can only be described as recognition. This is no coincidence. This is the spark responding to what is familiar to it. The archons in the system of the Apocrypha of John are not necessarily evil beings in the conventional sense. They are more like administrators, bureaucrats of the system. Their function is to keep material reality running according to its standards. And to do this, they have developed over millennia an extraordinarily effective system of capturing attention and energy. The system works through layers of artificial importance, things that have no real weight but to which social weight has been assigned so consistently for so long that most people can no longer distinguish real weight from manufactured weight. Career matters, salary matters, address matters, the type of car matters, the opinion of colleagues matters, family approval matters, public perception matters. None of these things have weight in the dimension that the pneumatic spark inhabits. And here is what is genuinely cruel about this situation. The pneumatic person knows this at some level. They know that these things do not weigh the way they are supposed to, but they also know they cannot say it. You cannot say that the promotion your colleague celebrated for 3 weeks seems to you about as mildly important as the position of the flower vase on the window. You cannot say that the discussion about which neighborhood is best for raising children seems to happen in a language you understand grammatically, but that does not resonate emotionally. So you learn to perform. You learn the right gestures, the right expressions, the right words. You learn to simulate the alignment you do not have. And this constant effort of simulation, this permanent work of translation between your internal world and the external world, is exhausting in a way that has no name in any psychology manual, because no psychology manual considers the possibility that the problem is not in you. The Apocrypha of John says that Yaldabaoth created the archons specifically to manage forgetfulness, to ensure that the pneumatic sparks imprisoned in matter would not remember where they came from. And the most effective tool of forgetfulness is not pain. It is distraction. It is artificial urgency. It is the feeling that there is always something more important to occupy yourself with than the underlying question, the real question, the only question that the spark truly wants to answer. Who am I really? Where did I come from? Where do I go when Yaldabaoth's system ends? These questions, when they arise, are quickly replaced by the next meeting, by tomorrow's deadline, by yesterday's social judgment, by the fear of not measuring up to what everyone expects of you. The system is extraordinarily efficient at filling every silence with noise, and the silence for the pneumatic is where the spark lives. There is something that needs to be said clearly here, because there is a real danger in interpreting Pleromic misalignment in a way that generates arrogance. The Gnostic texts do not say that the pneumatic is superior. They say they are different in their constitution. And this difference is not a privilege. It is a responsibility. It is also frequently a form of suffering that has very little company. To be pneumatic in the world of Yaldabaoth means to live with a hunger that the world cannot feed. It means seeking something that has no address on any material GPS. It means looking at the milestones everyone says will bring fulfillment and feeling that yes, you can achieve them, you have the capacity for it, but no, they are not going to fill what needs to be filled, because what needs to be filled is the distance between the spark and the pleroma, and no promotion closes that distance, no marriage closes that distance, no material achievement. The only thing that comes close is recognition. The moment you find another being who seems to be operating from the same misalignment, the moment you read a text that speaks about you without having known you, the moment the vacuum inside you resonates with something that is not matter. The Gnostics called this gnosis, not intellectual knowledge, lived knowledge, recognition, the direct experience that the spark knows something that the rational mind cannot completely articulate, but that the entire body recognizes as true. When gnosis happens, the Pleromic misalignment changes in nature. It does not disappear. Yaldabaoth's world remains what it is. The meetings continue. The social expectations continue. But you begin to inhabit your misalignment differently. Instead of wondering what is wrong with you, you begin to wonder what the spark is trying to show you. Before continuing to what is perhaps the most important part of this video, I want you to consider something very specific. If you made it this far, it is not by accident. Algorithms do not put this content in front of Heilig people. It does not resonate with those who are completely at home in this system. If this video reached you and you are still here, that is already a form of recognition. The pneumatic code was created for this moment. When you feel the door opening but still do not know what is on the other side, it gathers the instructions that the Nag Hammadi texts left specifically for those who reached this point. How to recognize and work with your pneumatic spark. How to navigate Yaldabaoth's system without being consumed by it. How to find other pneumatics. How gnosis arrives and what to do when it comes. The link is pinned in the comments and in the description. Only available while this video is online. Now, what the Gnostic texts say about what happens when the spark awakens. The Apocrypha of John describes a process called anamnesis. From the Greek, it means the undoing of forgetfulness. It is not a single dramatic event. It is a gradual process of memory recovery. Memory not of past events in this world, but of a nature that was always present but was systematically obscured. Anamnesis begins almost always with a rupture. Something in the system fails in a way that cannot be ignored, a loss that cannot be processed within normal coping resources, a crisis that temporarily removes the veil of artificial urgency that kept attention focused on the right things. And in this space created by the rupture, something older begins to emerge. For some, anamnesis begins with a book. A sentence that seems impossible to have been written by another human being because it captures with surgical precision an experience you could never put into words. For others, it begins with a recurring dream that has no conventional narrative logic but leaves a feeling of having been visited by something important. For others, it begins exactly like this, with a video, with a text, with a conversation, with something that says, "You are not alone in this. You are not broken. There is a language for what you feel." The Pistis Sophia, another of the Nag Hammadi texts, describes the process of anamnesis with an image that became famous among scholars of Gnosis. It speaks of a seed of light planted inside the pneumatic being. And this seed, at first, does not have the strength to break through the layer of soil covering it. Yaldabaoth's system, with its weight of distraction and artificial urgency, keeps the seed asleep. But there comes a point where the internal pressure of the seed becomes greater than the external pressure of the system. And when that happens, the seed begins to grow. And once it begins to grow, it never stops. This is the point where the Pleromic Misalignment changes signs. Instead of being just a source of suffering, a constant feeling of being out of place, it begins to be also a source of guidance. The compass that did not respond to the magnetic field of the system of Yaldabaoth begins to find the magnetic field for which it was made. And when that happens, for the first time, indifference to the things of the world begins to make sense not as a flaw, but as fidelity. Fidelity to what you truly are. The Gospel of Philip, also found in Nag Hammadi, says something that is disturbingly direct. He who has not received the knowledge of where he came from does not know where he is going. He who knows where he came from knows where he is going, and he who knows where he is going lives differently in the present. This is the practical difference between the pneumatic who has not yet gone through anamnesis and the pneumatic who has. Before anamnesis, misalignment is just suffering, incomprehension, a constant feeling of inadequacy, an exhausting effort of simulation. After anamnesis, the misalignment remains. Yaldabaoth's world does not change, but the relationship with the misalignment changes completely. You come to understand that not being able to care about the things everyone else considers important is not a failure of empathy. It is a difference in frequency. The things of Yaldabaoth's system operate on a frequency to which your spark was simply never tuned. And trying to force that tuning is not growth. It is betrayal. Betrayal of what you truly are. I want to tell you about some specific patterns that consistently appear in those who are going through the process of anamnesis, because recognizing these patterns can be, in itself, a form of gnosis. The first pattern is what we might call memory without narrative. You feel that you remember something, but you cannot say what. It is less a memory of an event and more a memory of a state of existence that seems to have preceded this one, a feeling that somewhere, at some level of reality that has no geographic coordinate, there is a completeness that this world does not access. People going through anamnesis frequently describe this pattern with the same words, as if I always knew there was something else. Not after this life. Before. The second pattern is the inability to sustain characters. The Hillocks and many psychics can maintain stable personas for decades. The professional persona, the family persona, the social persona. For the pneumatic in the process of anamnesis, these personas begin to crack. Not because you are fickle or immature, but because the spark, as it awakens, increasingly refuses to collaborate with the fiction that you are only what the system says you are. The third pattern is what we can call an allergy to false weight. When someone around you treats something trivial with disproportionate seriousness, your body reacts before your mind can filter it. Not with visible judgment, but with a kind of subtle nausea, a feeling that energy is being misdirected, that weight is being placed where it shouldn't be. This reflex, which many pneumatic people mistake for intolerance or arrogance, is actually the spark recognizing the wrong magnetic field. The fourth pattern is a magnetism for epistemic marginals. You feel attracted to people who ask questions that have no official answer, who question the structure rather than just its contents, who seem to operate from an internal logic that does not ask permission from external consensus to exist. Not necessarily wiser or more balanced people, but people who seem to know that the border of the map is not the border of the territory. And the fifth pattern, the hardest to articulate, is what the Apocrypha of John would call a homesickness for a home with no location. A nostalgia that does not point anywhere in this world. It is not longing for childhood, nor for a lost relationship, nor for a place you have already visited. It is a longing for a condition that human language lacks the adequate vocabulary to describe. A longing for the pleroma, for fullness, for the completeness that the spark carries as genetic memory. When you recognize these patterns in yourself, something changes. Not immediately, not dramatically, but the misalignment stops being a diagnosis and begins to be a compass. The Hermetic texts, especially the Corpus Hermeticum, complement the Apocrypha of John with a slightly different perspective that illuminates the same phenomenon. The Corpus Hermeticum speaks of noesis, which we can translate as direct perception of reality, as opposed to perception mediated by the senses and social conditioning. Noesis is described as a faculty that most human beings have latent, but which needs to be activated. And what activates this faculty, according to Hermes Trismegistus, is not study or intellectual effort. It is recognition. Recognition that you came from somewhere different from this place. Recognition that your internal nature is not an accident or a mistake. Recognition that the misalignment you feel is not separation from reality, but separation from the illusion that the system wants you to mistake for reality. There is a passage in the Apocrypha of John that is rarely quoted, but which, for anyone going through the process of anamnesis, has the weight of a spark falling on dry straw. The text describes the moment when the pneumatic spark inside a human being begins to awaken and says that the archons notice this, and that the archons' response to the awakening of the spark is to intensify the noise. More urgency, more distraction, more artificial weight on the things of the system, more social pressure to conform, to belong, to demonstrate alignment with the values of Yaldabaoth's world. If you are going through a period where you feel that the noise around you has increased, that external demands seem more insistent than ever, that the pressure to be a certain version of yourself seems more intense than it was before, this might not be a coincidence. It might be the spark awakening and the system responding. What the Gnostic texts prescribe for this moment is not withdrawal from the world. It is not asceticism. It is not escape. It is not the abandonment of material responsibilities. The pneumatic is not called to leave Yaldabaoth's system. They are called to navigate it with awareness of their real nature. There is a distinction that the Gospel of Philip makes with striking precision. It says there is a difference between being in the world and being of the world. Being in the world means inhabiting physical reality, having a body, having relationships, having responsibilities, having a life that happens within the coordinates of Yaldabaoth's system. This is inevitable as long as the spark is incarnated. Being of the world means believing that Yaldabaoth's system is the only reality, that its weights are the only real weights, that its definitions of success and failure are the only valid ones. The pneumatic who has gone through anamnesis is in the world but is not of the world, and this does not manifest as total disinterest in material life. It manifests as a capacity to inhabit material life without being defined by it, to fulfill the functions that incarnate existence requires without losing sight of the fact that these functions are not the point. The point is the spark. The point is what the spark carries. The point is the return movement to the Pleroma, which the Apocrypha of John describes not as physical death, but as a process of gradual realignment that can happen within a human life. And here we come to what may be the most important part of everything that has been said so far. The way this realignment begins. It does not begin with sophisticated spiritual practices. It does not begin with rituals or meditations or elaborate belief systems. It begins with a very simple and very radical thing. It begins with stopping diagnosing yourself as a problem. Every time you look in the mirror and think, what is wrong with me, you are asking the question that Yaldabaoth's system wants you to ask. You are accepting the assumption that the standard by which you measure yourself is the correct standard, that the norm is alignment with the system, that deviation from the norm is a defect. The Apocrypha of John proposes an inversion. What was called a defect is the mark of the Pleroma. What was called misalignment is loyalty to your real nature. What was called indifference to important things is simply that the spark knows what is truly important, and the system is not offering it. When you stop asking yourself what is wrong with you and start asking yourself what my spark is trying to show me, the entire experience of Pleromic misalignment reorganizes itself. The vacuum you feel at the family table is not an absence of love. It is the presence of discernment. The fog that descends when the world speaks about things that hold no weight is not indifference. It is the spark refusing to spend its attention on magnetic fields that are not its own. The homesickness with no location is not pathology. It is the memory of origin. Nothing changed in the world, but everything changed in the way you inhabit the misalignment. There is a community. This is important to say. There is a community of people who recognize Pleromic misalignment not in themselves in isolation, but in each other, who find in their exchanges something that no interaction with the world of the system can offer. A type of recognition that does not need to be explained because it is immediate, like two instruments tuned to the same note that resonate when placed in the same room. The Gnostics of the early centuries created communities like this. They gathered not to practice a cult, but to practice recognition, to name together what each had felt in isolation, to create language for what the system had no language for. They were systematically destroyed. The texts were burned, the communities were scattered. The institutional church, which needed a God who was the ultimate authority and not a spark of light within every being, treated the Gnostics as an existential threat. And in a sense they were, because gnosis removes intermediaries. It removes the need for an institution between the spark and the Pleroma. But the texts survived in a clay jar in the Egyptian desert for 1600 years, waiting. And in 1945, when Muhammad Ali al-Salman broke the jar, the texts emerged into a world that, perhaps for the first time since they were written, was mature enough to hear them. A world with enough technology to distribute them, with enough psychology to suspect that the standard model of a human being perhaps does not explain everything, with enough people who had reached the limit of what Yaldabaoth's system can offer and who were looking for something else. People like you. There is something that happens when you read the Apocrypha of John, knowing that you are reading about yourself, not as an intellectual exercise, not as religious archaeology, but as recognition, as if the text were a mirror reflecting not your face but your spark. You stop in the middle of a sentence and think, someone wrote this 2,000 years ago, someone who never knew you, who lived in a completely different world, who used a completely different language, described with precision what you feel in work meetings, at family dinners, in moments of silence at dawn when homesickness with no location appears and you do not know what to do with it. And this thought, this recognition, is in itself a form of gnosis. It is the spark recognizing another spark across time. It is the Pleroma signaling that the distance between you and it is not as great as Yaldabaoth's system wanks you to believe. The question you arrived here asking, what is wrong with me, was the wrong question. The right question, the question that 2,000 years of Gnostic tradition was keeping for you, is completely different. The right question is, what do I do now that I know I am a spark of the Pleroma temporarily imprisoned in a system that was not made for me? And the answer does not fit into a single video. It does not fit into a single conversation. It fits into a process of anamnesis that is different for each person because each spark has its own trajectory of return. But it begins here. It begins in this moment. It begins the instant you stop apologizing for the misalignment and start inhabiting it as what it really is. Not a defect, a direction, not the absence of something, the presence of something the system does not know how to name, not apathy, memory. The spark knows where it came from, And because it knows where it came from, it will never be able to fully pretend that it belongs to a place that is not home. Not convincingly, not sustainably, not in a way that does not leave a trail of exhaustion and vacuum. But when you stop pretending that the vacuum is a problem and begin to understand that the vacuum is guidance, that the space the things of the system cannot fill is exactly the size of the distance between you and the Pleroma, and therefore is exactly the size of the journey you have ahead of you, then the Pleromic Misalignment transforms from a prison into a compass, from a diagnosis into an identity, from a wound into a door. You are not sitting at the family table watching others get emotional over the right things because there is something wrong with you. You are sitting there with a spark of original light inside your chest that has enough memory of the Pleroma to know that no promotion, no car, no engagement will close the distance that the spark needs to close. And this spark, in the silence of that moment, while the hugs happen around you and the noise of the system fills the air, is doing exactly what it has always done, pointing home, to a place for which this world has no coordinates, but that you recognize when you find it, because the spark warms up and the vacuum stops for an instant that seems eternal, being empty. The script provided has already been completely translated in the first response, as the source text provided under Comece Agora contained the entire narrative from the opening family scene to the final conclusion. E se torna tudo o que sempre deveria ter sido. Because the entire text was processed and delivered in the previous step, the translation is already fully finished.